Okay. Meeting's called to order here at 6 o'clock. Natalie, may we have a roll call, please?
Chairperson Phil Goldstein,
Here.
Vice Chairperson Marty Jost, Commissioner Lisa Bard. Here. Commissioner Tom Wood,
Here.
Commissioner Jeremy Holt,
Here.
alternate Wendy Newland. Here. Alternate Mike Lewis.
Here.
The administrative determination of alternate voting, we will not have any alternate vote because we have a full group of regular commissioners. Public comment. This is an opportunity for anybody who wishes to address anything that is not on the agenda may do so. Comments limited to 3 minutes, please. Anybody signed up, Natalie? Okay, so not, you're something that's on the agenda, Bill?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, very good. We'll get to
Do I
that.
need to wait until then?
Uh,
No public comment
There,
for 6C specific.
staff, is that correct? There will be, I thought there should be public comment. Okay, so we'll defer that until that
Okay,
time. That was
yeah,
just,
that's fine.
yeah, that's just an oversight.
Yeah,
okay.
no worries.
All right, very good. So nobody else signed up for general public comment. We have applicants here. Okay, we close the general public comment. The consent agenda consists only of the approval of the February 7th, 2023 meeting minutes. Commissioners, any additions or corrections to the minutes?
Corrections to the minute.
Turn your mic, why don't you turn your microphone on? All thousands of people out there tuning in may want to hear this.
Corrections to the minutes. I was not listed as being present, but Jeremy Holt was listed twice.
Natalie, you got that? Okay. Any other additions or corrections to this? Thanks, Wendy. Glad you caught that. Okay, do I have a motion, if it's not inappropriate, do I have a motion on the consent agenda with the correction as noted by Wendy Newland?
So moved.
Second? Second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, the consent agenda approval of the February 7th, 2023 meeting minutes is it's approved with the corrections noted by Wendy. Item 6A under business, resolution for annexation for property known as Red Barn to the town of Timnath. Chad.
Thank you, Chairperson. Let me get this shared on the screen for you. So this is an annexation proposal for the property referred to as Red Barn. The property is currently owned by 5258 Ranch LLC, represented by Derek Hoffmeister, and the applicant is Ripley Design, represented by Clara Russo. The petition was brought forth to Town Council for substantial compliance on January 10th. Following their approval, noticing for today's public hearing was published for 4 consecutive weeks in the Coloradan, along with the town's requirements to notice residents within 500 feet of the property. The subject property outlined in blue is located east of Larimer Parkway or Latham Parkway and directly east of Wild Wing Park. Roughly 231 feet of the property's boundary is immediately adjacent to the town, meeting the state statute for contiguity. This annexation will consist of a parcel of land totaling roughly 2.4 acres. The property is currently located in unincorporated Weld County and falls within the town's GMA. With the annexation, the application is requesting to amend the town zoning map for this property to community commercial, which complies with the town's comprehensive plan. As you may remember, this parcel completed an amendment to that comprehensive plan, granting them the designation of commercial mixed use, which would allow for this community commercial zoning district. These applications and the petition have been reviewed against state statute and the Timnath Land Use Code. Happy to answer any questions you may have. The applicant is here and the owner, if you have any questions for them.
Anything else you want to present? If so, come up the microphone. If not, I'll just going to open it up to questions up here. You good with that? Okay, That's the way we like it here, certainly. Okay, commissioners. Item 6A, questions, comments. We're in I take you're going to move on to the next one. We're not going to talk. That was both.
That was both the
Okay,
annexation
yeah,
and
I
the zoning.
thought,
Yep.
okay, good. That's doubly helpful here. Commissioners, questions, comments for Chad, staff, applicant
I have a
on
couple
6AB. Lisa?
I have a couple questions. I'm assuming that there are no conflicts with it being a Weld County property. I mean, they're annexing into this town. It's no property, no problem.
Correct. We do have an agreement with Weld County, not quite as extensive as what we have with Larimer County, but based on it being adjacent to the property, it can be annexed within the town. So they've seen this and they've signed off on that. So.
Are there any things that we have to give to Weld County from a tax standpoint or anything else that we have to do? Or is it, once it becomes town, its county designation is irrelevant?
Correct.
Okay. And then in the presentation that the packets you gave us, as far as what the town is responsible for, because it's a piece of property, obviously it's pretty small and it's far away, it's out there. Does the town have any, not necessarily liabilities, but responsibilities other than providing normal town services there?
No, so yeah, the actual road work that will be done along that is done through the applicant. That is their responsibility of the developer. All of that will be taken care of by them. So at that point,
Yeah, so currently Latham Parkway is already in maintenance of the town since it's town right of way. So that'll continue. Anything on property will be the responsibility of the property owner, just as any normal site. If and when Latham widens, it will still be the responsibility of the town. So there's not much at this point in time. There's no additional responsibility that the town has to take on. It's just keeping the current, status quo of maintaining Latham as we currently do. It's just when Latham widens in the future, the town just takes on that additional responsibility, and that potentially would happen with or without development of this property.
Okay. And then the last one, and this is a question more looking big picture and certainly not in any way derogatory towards the applicants or anything, but if the proposed development or, project does not be successful over time, then that property is zoned and we're in a direction, say 10 years down the road, the Red Barn, y'all decide to take your earnings and go to the Bahamas, then is that property from a big picture town's perspective still going to be beneficial to Timnath in its zoning, in its location, things like that? And that's kind of a hypothetical, theoretical question for all involved. Just trying to, again, look at the big picture.
yeah, so based on the size of the property, I don't think there would necessarily be a negative impact if for some reason this use didn't come in. Yes, you're correct. In the CC zoning, any permitted use could go in that zone should it fit within that those dimensions, those restricted dimensions they have. But I don't necessarily think that would create anything negative unless Kevin has any input on that.
No, so with it, long term, if this use goes away or something along that lines, if this being the appropriate location for some CC, that was part of the decision that you and town council had to make when the comprehensive plan amendment came forward at the end of last year. Was, that is one of the things that you all have to weigh, is that long-term benefit there if, a use goes away or it changes uses, things like that. So from, a staff standpoint, as you mentioned, 10 years down the road, more of the properties around there could develop to where some other neighborhood services could replace it to then still be, viable and a great location for that. Like you mentioned, 10 years out, who knows what ends up happening, but with, the growth from our standpoint, it could turn into other neighborhood services that could serve a more population by the time more in Severance develops, potentially more in the Timnath area develops, and it can still be pretty viable.
Thank you.
That was a good question. Just so everybody that bothered to take a shower and come out tonight gets their money's worth. You mind if I ask Chad, mainly because in all seriousness, we've got so many new and almost new commissioners. Could you, one of you, just explain briefly to Lisa's question about this is actually Weld County, how this comes about an IGA, right? This is an intergovernmental agreement. Could you tell us what everybody else might want to know about how this can how this can happen?
Yeah, so as you've all probably seen, the town's growth management area actually spans across Weld County and Larimer County by virtue of Latham Parkway. We have to a mile east of Latham Parkway, which is Weld County Road 15, that's within our growth management area. Generally from Wild Wing north up to County Road, what is Larimer County Road 56, Cobb Lake area within our growth management area. And basically by that growth management area, it sets the framework for what properties annexed to the town. We have the IGA with Weld County. As Chad had mentioned, it's a little bit more of a loose IGA than the Larimer County one. Weld County typically doesn't like to do pretty heavily restrictive and detailed IGAs with municipalities, especially one of Timnath where there's not as much land that could potentially be within Weld County. So generally our IGA with Weld County is if it's contiguous, they're eligible to actually come to the town. Unlike the Larimer County one, where if a property is contiguous, Larimer County would tend to push somebody to an annexation. Weld County is a little bit different, that they kind of leave it to the property owner, what they want to do, if they want to annex or not. And then it just depends on if they want to develop in Weld County or not, since their use, that they intend to do, the coffee shop. Weld County expressed some concerns about that within their zoning. So at that point, that's where the property owner felt it was probably best to annex to the town. So that's kind of how we get to this point with Weld County generally, is that, our IGA is a little bit looser and it offers up some flexibility for property owners to stay in Weld County or not. But then it kind of then puts back to how they want to develop the property.
Commissioners, any questions on that?
So question, given that they're not in the town right now, and I understand that Weld County rules allows them to put up a shell. Once the annexation goes into place, do they have to stop until a site plan is approved, or how does that work?
So they have their Weld County permit for the shell that they have right now. Basically, they're able to finish out the shell permit with that. We've been in constant communication with our building official on kind of then when the transition is going to take place, but they're able to at least finish out the shell permit even once it's annexed to the town. And then once they're in the town, then they abide by, the building code that we have in place.
Okay, thanks.
Commissioners, other questions about this proposal? Thanks for indulging me. Any other questions? Tom, anything?
Nope, I'm good.
Okay, all right. Okay, we're going to vote on these two separately. Item 6A, resolution for annexation for property known as Red Barn to the town of Timnath. Do I have a motion on item 6A?
Make a motion to approve.
We have a motion to approve. I have a second.
Second.
Second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries on a 5-0 vote. Item 6B, zoning map amendment for the annexation of the property known as Red Barn. Do I have a motion on item 6B?
Motion to approve item 6B.
Thank you. Do I have a second? Second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Item 6B. Moving forward. Thank you. Item 6C, land use code amendment number 13. Kevin.
Thank you, Chairperson. So
No,
after the presentation.
we'll do after,
Yep.
after the presentation.
So as some of you might have remembered, we as staff have started in on looking at potentially land use code amendments twice a year, kind of once at the beginning, once, in the middle if needed. And so this is this year's first rendition of some land use code changes. A lot of these land use code changes are kind of some cleanup items and based off of, changing design practices and how things are developing out, in relation to landscape design with xeriscape, adding in some flexibility on that, electric vehicle charging stations, changing. We had requirements in there, but just kind of changing and making them a little bit more stricter and enforceable as to the, the level of charging, where they can be. Site lighting, landscape requirements. That was probably the biggest one within this. There was some differences within our land use code currently about park and open space requirement. Is the number of dwelling units, how much acreage they have to provide, the level of service that was in there. So it's cleanup on some items like that, some dimensional standards, adding in some uses, that are becoming more relevant in the town. So just changes like that are what we're going with on this. I can go through each one kind of one by one if you would like. I can kind of give a high level on each, depends on what all you would like to go through from that standpoint.
May I suggest that let's first, if it's okay, and this is kind of a head nod, if it's okay, I'm fine with us asking of various questions. If we don't have any questions on something, then is that all right with everybody? Alternates include. Yeah, just throw it open and pick whichever one you want, and we can discuss that. But I appreciate you offering that, Kevin. Is that okay? Everybody, alternates included? Okay.
I have questions on virtually almost everything.
Oh, you do?
Perfect.
Okay. Then,
Sorry, guys.
all right.
You're fine. That's what we're here for.
Yeah. Get our money's worth here. Can I write Don?
All right, so we'll start with the first one.
Okay, go ahead. You want to add that? Do you want to lob out your questions?
Right.
We can do that.
If you want to go that route, that's.
Okay. Yeah, this is a little different.
It is a little bit different, but yeah, if you,
I'm okay with that. If you,
we can do discussion first and then public
okay, let's have
comment, or
public comment.
and then
Bill,
discussion.
Natalie, I assume Mr. Jacobs signed up for public comment. All right, Bill, you got your 3 minutes.
Now,
Hello? Please state your name and address, please.
Yeah,
And you turned it off.
there we go. My name's Dr. Bill Jenkins. I live at 5507 Sugarloaf Court. I just wanted to, I've read through this in detail, and I actually wanted to come down here and say thanks for doing this, because I think there's some really smart additions, including the xeriscape, the electrical vehicle, charging stations make a lot of sense. The seasonal and holiday sales, also the site lighting, parks and open space. I thought that was really thoughtful as well. And then finally, boy, is that thing sensitive. I thought the addition of the 10% administrative waiver option under the discretion of the Director of Development made a lot of sense. It'll save everybody a lot of time, and time is money. So, and it's a small, 10% is pretty minimal. So anyways, I just wanted to say thanks. I thought it was really well done.
Thank you,
That's it.
Bill. Okay, we closed the public comment. Kevin, all right, contrary to what how I had it going,
It's all
Why
right.
don't you introduce each one and
Yep.
let's see if we have any comments and then we'll move on if there's no comments. or
Yep. So
questions.
the first one is 5.7.7. This is the Xeriscape standards. So this is changing to allow the use of Xeriscape design principles. So we removed two sections of the land use code that talked about, appropriate turf selection of bluegrass. And then we added in 7 new sections that kind of get to more of a Xeriscape design, for efficient irrigation, mulches, soil improvements, appropriate plant selections, and then kind of some other cleanup items for that. So this was generally intended to start giving some folks the ability to provide more of a xeriscape. And when we talk about xeriscape, we're not talking xeroscape to where there's no planting material. It's, all rock. What this does, it actually kind of gives people more of the flexibility to do live ground coverings. Like junipers that can spread out to 4 or 5 feet over periods of time, some things like that. So it just kind of gives some more parameters for some folks to do some ability with that. We've gotten more and more inquiries to that over the past year from residents and developers as such. So this is kind of the first start to allow for some of that.
Okay, questions on, sorry, Kevin, were you done?
No, you're good.
Okay,
Yep.
questions on this one?
I just have one quick question.
Yeah.
When Xeriscape in the description is trademarked, so is that a series of very specific management practices, best practices that are
Yep.
identifiable? You can refer back to it. It basically would give the town a lot of authority because it's outside as third party.
Yep, the Xeriscape actually is a trademark term, and a lot of these design practices come from that outside world of here's where you get to these, best practices, design principles for Xeriscape. So that's the only reason why the trademark is in there is just Xeriscape is technically a
No, it's
trademark
good. I
term.
mean, it's like if you're going to label beef natural or organic, you have to meet these criteria, boom, 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 boom. And it allows, like I said, it gives the town a very set
Yep.
order of principles. Okay. I just wanted to verify that. That was my
Okay,
question.
anything else on this item?
Yep. So in this one, we specifically took out bluegrass, and I just had a question why. I mean, I know there's a lot of kind of high water use grasses, so it's impossible to list them all. But the thing I liked about bluegrass being in there specifically is there's most of the HOAs specify bluegrass. And, so it was nice to have that in, and, it's one of those with the water getting the way it is. Should we, can we put in words that, just specifically say HOAs will not dictate, like bluegrass? A lot of them say bluegrass.
So an HOA can be more restrictive. A metro district can be more restrictive than the town. So that's why we added in the number 2, the appropriate use of turf and the limit high water use turf to high traffic areas. So that's why we made that change, was to specifically remove the bluegrass specific term for it, to give it more of a generic, because you can get to different types of grass that are, that use less water. They're more efficient that way. So we wanted to give that flexibility from that standpoint to give to folks to have that design. If a metro district wants to go above and beyond that, that is their, ability to do that. They can't be less restrictive from that standpoint.
Yeah.
So we can't dictate to a metro district that says you can't have bluegrass, period. But if they want to have bluegrass, that's something that they can allow from that standpoint.
But it's, the state anyway dictates, and they have a couple times in the last year, they've dictated that HOA will not restrict this and that, like.
Yeah, the state can set regulations for.
But local municipalities can't.
We cannot dictate
Okay.
how what they can enforce or not enforce from that standpoint.
So,
Since they are technically a governing body
yeah,
from that standpoint, that's why we have technically IGAs with them when the Metro District is approved
mhm.
from that standpoint, but they cannot be less restrictive than what the town has.
So with that, I mean, there's no change that we can make to this then, but one of the things I'd make, a suggestion, a procedural one, that we add a review of that specifically when we're approving a new phase or a new subdivision, because, I mean, at these times, it's ridiculous to use bluegrass.
Yep.
And to change that out in your lawn, you have to go through what can be an expensive and time-consuming design requirement review.
Yeah, we can definitely look at that.
Okay,
And I know there are some metro districts that they actually have a lot of residents that are pushing towards more of the xeriscape and not using bluegrass.
yeah,
So I think a lot of them are backing off a lot of those restrictions and
they're
requirements.
selectively applying them.
Yes.
Okay,
Are we good on this one? Anybody else on this one? Kevin, next one.
Hold on, quick
Oh,
question.
go ahead.
Sorry, Dylan.
Does this, and maybe I see the term turf a lot, which can be identified as multiple different things, but does this allow or take away? You see obviously a big push for artificial turf. Does this allow, or are we allowing that in as part of a conservation?
So we'll get to that one in a future one.
Okay.
Yep.
perfect. Sounds good.
All right. Anybody else on this one? Okay. Next one.
So we'll now touch on that one. So this is to 578. This is primarily to landscaping within the right of way and common space. So the tree lawns that are in front of almost everyone's home that are typically within the right of way, part of the town's property, but maintained by the homeowner. So what we've changed within this is that those tree lawns can have the 75% line. They have to have at least a minimum of 75% live ground covering. So like we talked, junipers, grasses, ornamental grasses, turf, flowers, any combination of that. What we did add within that is artificial turf, similar into appearance of live turf may be allowed on a case-by-case basis, which staff has to approve. So if anyone wants to use an artificial turf, at that point, it can be within the 25% non-live ground covering, but we would need to approve it and see what that design is. Typically, what we would see with somebody wanting to utilize that is if in the middle of their tree lawn, that's where they have a walk path to get up to the sidewalk, just to cut down on, folks getting out of, when they have, visitors show up. If somebody wanted to put in, a little path that was the artificial turf within that 25% allowance, staff may allow that, but it's on a case by case basis. That's kind of why we threw it into that portion of it. So that's generally the idea behind these changes here, to allow some changes to the tree lawn from that standpoint.
the way I read it, that's only in the right of way. Somebody can go do their whole front.
If somebody wants to do their front yard, I mean, we do have live ground covering requirements as well. But back to the previous one, they'd have to go through their metro district to get approval.
Any other questions on this item?
I have a quick question. You've deleted ornamental trees,
Yes.
and is the reasoning by that is?
The term of an ornamental tree, not all ornamental trees are appropriate for a tree lawn from that standpoint. So by just changing it to be shade tree, because some ornamental trees are shade trees, but some ornamental trees are not shade trees. The intent is to actually get a shade tree, something that can get to 20, 30 feet in diameter that will provide, that shade coverage. So with it being ornamental, it kind of leaves it a little bit more vague. But when a shade tree, any landscape architect, tree nursery, they'll know what generally a shade tree is. So that gives the idea of that the tree needs to get to that growth to provide shade.
Because the ornamentals won't.
Some ornamentals will not.
Gotcha. Okay. And then on the case by case basis with the turf, how is staff going to determine what, I mean, do you have a set criteria or is that still developing?
So with this, we are going to be putting together guidelines for the xeriscape design. Fort Collins has a guidelines thing already out there in their realm that kind of gives you, here's the best practices for it. Here's good design of it. If somebody just wants to come in with 25%, that they just put little spots all around 1x1 squares throughout their tree lawn. That's something that's where we'd review it on a case by case basis to determine that's not the appropriate way to design the tree lawn.
Because as Marty said, artificial turf has a lot of emerging possibilities, but it also comes with some negatives too.
Yeah, and that's why we added in section F, which is, a right-of-way landscape amendment that, the town has to review it.
Yep.
And then, we have the approved with conditions or denied, by staff, depending on what their design is. So that's where the case by case basis comes in, is if, like I mentioned, if we get a design where somebody just wants to do a little 1 foot by 1 foot spots, just to, say, hey, I don't want to water that. That's not a good design principle.
So, no further questions.
Anything else? Anybody else on this item? No? Okay, next one, Kevin, please.
So hopefully this one is pretty straightforward. This one is adding in a use of seasonal and holiday sales. So generally your pumpkin lots, Christmas tree lots, things like that. That may pop up randomly here and there. We actually got a couple of inquiries this last fall for some that actually never came through. And since we really didn't have specifics in our code, that's why we've added this in. Generally to the hours of operation, the use of a sales office, kind of where they can be located, and then the specificity of the actual sale of goods that is going to be done. So it's just adding in this use of the seasonal and holiday sales to the code.
Any questions on this one? Nope. Okay, next one. Okay. Microphone. Put your mic on.
4.4.19.2. The way that one was worded, is my assumption correct that the way it's worded is it's essentially excluding like garage sales or farmers markets?
Yep,
food
it's
trucks. And
yeah,
things?
those are different uses
Okay.
within our land use code. It's this is more to say that somebody can't basically use a holiday sales as a farmer's market.
Okay. Thanks.
Okay, next one.
So this next one is on electric vehicle charging. So currently in the town, we did have criteria for electric vehicle charging stations. We had basically it's set up as for a new commercial development that exceeded 75 spaces. That's when a EV station would have to be provided, and they gave the option of they provide it or they at least wire the parking lot to provide it. And then we had different allowances for the levels of charging in certain districts, zoning districts. So what we've done is we've basically now changed it to remove that any commercial development is going to have to provide EV stations, not just the wiring. They actually have to provide the physical station to charge your vehicle. And then what we did is we then also restricted the level of charging stations to be more defined, because previously in the code, a community commercial business could provide a level 1 charging station. Level 1 charging station is typically what you put in your house, something that takes 8-10 hours to charge your vehicle. It's a very slow charge. So we've changed that to basically say level 3, which is your fast charge, and level 2 is where you need to provide in those zoning districts. That's where you provide those level 2 or level 3 charging stations. And then we actually added in a requirement that multifamily provide electric vehicle charging stations at 1 per 50 parking spaces, and that's on top of their required parking. So if there was a, multifamily development that required 250 parking stalls, they would have to provide the 5 AV stations on top of the 250 normal. That way they weren't, there's not a way to kind of skirt the system of saying, well, we're going to provide 10 charging stations. So, that's part of our 250 because not all, vehicles require the charging. And especially in an apartment complex, typically you don't have, first come, first serve to a EV station. So having that on top allows at least everyone having the right amount of parking, and then the EV station within there. And then we also then added in a requirement that there will be at least one ADA space that is also part of EV station.
Questions on this one?
So if I'm understanding that right, so are you saying for every 50 parking spots, they have to have an EV station?
In multifamily, correct?
Multifamily.
Yep.
So multifamily meaning townhomes that are in Timnath Ranch or apartment complex?
It'd be the apartment complex.
Okay, so
Yeah,
not.
so
not
like the
more.
Timnath Trail apartments right across the way, they would have had requirements
Okay.
that you would have had either 4 or 5 that they would have had to have installed if this requirement was in at that time.
Gotcha. Okay, so that not going backwards though.
No, it's for new multifamily going forward. It's 1 per 50 spaces they have to provide.
Gotcha.
Are those level 1, level 2? 'Cause I didn't think that was specified.
So they would be able to have level 1 or level 2
Mhm.
from that standpoint. Typically, people that it's almost it acts as a home for them. So people show up at night, charge their car, go to work the next day. Typically, with a multifamily, you don't need to have a rapid charge from a level 3 from that standpoint.
On those units too, is there a requirement for maintenance and upkeep? I don't know enough about a charging unit, but they put one in, might not be the best brand, right? Off brand or whatever it may be.
Yep.
And it breaks down. What is their requirement as far as maintaining and upkeeping so that those people in multifamily?
So that would be
consistently-
up to the management company of the multifamily.
Okay.
To
The town isn't involved in the maintenance side
no,
or making
town
sure.
does not maintain any of the EV stations that we currently have.
I'm not necessarily saying that you guys maintain it as much as if someone calls from the apartment complex and says, this thing's been broken for months, nobody's going to fix it. Does the town step in or does
Yep.
that go to the?
At that point, if we get a complaint that a EV station, we would reach out to management, whoever it is that would be responsible for that to make sure that it met the requirements that it's
Gotcha.
operational.
So in this, it says the commercial, mixed use and industrial is required, like you said, to have at least 1 level 3. Some of these commercial and mixed use, is that going to be kind of a burden for some of the small businesses? Because a level 3 is, I don't know, in my research, anywhere from $30,000 to $80,000. So if this was like a commercial or a mixed use area that is just like one business, seems like a lot of money.
So the level 3 only becomes a requirement for every 200 parking spaces.
Oh, okay.
So when we get
Misunderstood
to, large like Floor and Decor, Costco, Walmart,
Okay.
that's when the level 3 becomes a requirement. Level 2 is at least allowed in, the CMU, RMU, CC zoning districts. So at least it's a little bit more attainable
Yeah.
for some of those business owners to provide.
Mhm.
But yeah, the level 3, we give the option off the bat that, a large big box might put those in. We give that allowance, but once they get over 200, that's when a requirement kicks in that they have to install one of those.
Okay, I misunderstood that.
Yep.
Thanks.
Kevin, does this follow the state requirements or is this something that we've got that exceeds the state requirements?
We did not look exactly at the state requirements. We actually looked at other municipalities around this area on what a lot of them provide, just to kind of be in compliance with with those other municipalities from a design standpoint. We actually, I believe in some areas we are going above and beyond what some of them do. We've had some concerns from residents about The differences on, a commercial user already putting in a level 1 versus a level 2. So that's where we went a little bit above and beyond to, kind of dictate that anything at least that's not residential needs to at least have a, level 2, and then give the option of level 3. And then that, like I mentioned, that kicker to require it once they get to 200 spaces.
Yeah, I know the state has a requirement by, I think, June of this year to have a plan, but they're not dictating you have to have charging stations.
Yeah.
As I understand it.
Yep. So we're going above and beyond already with some of this.
Anything else? Tom, Wendy?
No, that's all.
I have a question.
Oh,
So-
wait a minute.
No, go ahead, Lisa.
No. All right, go ahead.
So I may be just really dumb about reading this, but to me, it reads like they can be permitted to put, I don't see anywhere in this document where it says they have to put this kind of charging station in the type of business. Help me understand.
So the very beginning where it says all commercial mixed use, business, industrial, multifamily developments shall provide designated parking spaces for the
Right.
charging of electrical vehicles. So that right there is saying that they shall provide them at the time of development.
But then down below, it says shall be permitted.
Yeah, so
Okay.
yeah, so at that point, that's where we have the ability to change depending on the zoning district, what they're providing, how many parking spaces, what the actual use is. That's where then it falls into B, C, D, or E. From that standpoint, that's where it gives a little bit of the flexibility depending on what district they're in, what they want to provide at that point. But the beginning is that's where it states that they shall provide these spaces from that
I'm
standpoint.
going to jump in, Kevin. On item D, Wendy, any commercial mixed use and industrial development shall provide at least one electrical charge
Right.
space and one additional for every 75.
That part I understand. It's just that I know that obviously level 1 is much cheaper than, as Marty said, level 3. So if I'm a business and it says I can do this, I would say, well, I'm putting in a level 1.
So that's where in the A, that's where we say level 1 charging stations shall be permitted in all residential.
Yeah.
And then that's where level 2 is, then that's where we put it in the RE, R1, R2, R3, R4 business and CCC. So since we've changed out, we've removed the in A where it says level 1, that included all of the commercial. Since we've removed that from that section, level 1 is not applicable to any commercial
Okay.
zoning district.
Okay.
Kevin, one other question. When would this be effective? I guess it'd have to go through town council.
Once it goes through town council.
So maybe by the summer, that's your plan?
Mid-March, end of March, those will become effective.
Okay, because this is going to, like you said, it's a big cost item. It's also going to be a big impact on XL Energy to provide that much more power.
Yeah, we've actually had some folks that are willing to meet and exceed the requirement, for EV stations from that standpoint. So we haven't gotten much pushback so far on folks putting them in. We've actually had some say, how many do you want? I mean, Floor and Decor actually went above and beyond their requirement. They were really only supposed to put in 4, and I think they put in 6 or 8.
Wow,
Level 2?
Yep.
that's going to require some big batteries. I hope the fire department's aware.
Everybody okay with this?
Yeah.
All right, next one,
No,
Kevin.
I-
No, oh, sorry,
I have a question.
sorry.
So on these, and this is my limited research, who is actually going to pay for the electricity that is pulled from by all these charges? Is that the business owner's responsibility? They're
Yep.
going to have it to where, okay, you plug in and so for.
Hey, we
X
don't have a
amount-
requirement that says there's a pay for charge or not. A business owner could do a pay for charge station that are typically out, at gas stations, or some folks might be willing to just add it on to their electric bill for the development. The one here at the town is not a pay for charge situation, but we don't have that requirement that's within there. A lot of it varies across the board. A lot of the places that you do go end up being a pay for charge. And I think a lot of the people that have electric vehicles understand that, and knowing it's just the same as paying for gas that they used to.
So down at the bottom, you removed number D, which is saying that those stalls have to be very designated that they are and that nobody else can park in them. Why is that removed?
We had removed that section from this code just because from the standpoint that not everyone going to a facility is going to be using a electric vehicle or they have an electric vehicle. It was then also placing a slight burden onto parking requirements as well. If somebody wants to put in 10 EV stations, in a commercial development and have them designated just for EV, then you run the risk of not having enough parking for other vehicles. At that point, that was our thought behind that.
Isn't that a bit of a conflict though? But if those are specifically designed for EV charging and it's kind of like handicapped. I mean, if you choose to park in it, then you are restricting those who want to be charging from using that.
We had looked at it as it was just as if it was a normal parking space. But that's one of the things that if you guys see differently.
I guess me personally, I would see it differently because, and it all depends on how the EV it progresses. But, if you're only asking them to put in X number of parking places, one for 50 spot, particularly in some of these apartments, and it's a level 1, you're going to pull in there, you're going to charge overnight. And you pull in at 10 o'clock at night and somebody else is there.
So on the multifamily, we did add in that exact requirement on E where it says the last sentence, each space shall be designated for electric vehicle parking only. So we've only removed that requirement from the commercial development. So the multifamily, we kept that in that, at least on that, from that standpoint, multifamily has to have it signed for specifically that use. The commercial, that's where we had looked at it a little bit differently, as if it was a normal parking space. Same thing could happen if you have, if you're going to the store with your, electric vehicle and I'm at the store and I've already parked in that space, you're already out the space potentially. So that's where we had looked at it as it's a normal space that's out there, generally, and that's why we had removed it from that standpoint.
But the count is 50 plus EVs are in addition.
And that's
to that.
for multifamily, correct?
And then, but a commercial property can designate those spaces if they so.
If they so choose, yeah.
Are you okay with that? Because I see her point entirely. You mentioned you talked with some surrounding communities. What do they do about this issue with commercial properties?
Some of them, they are mixed. I think there's a couple of areas even over in Fort Collins where spaces are designated as specifically for EV and some are not, that they're just general parking spaces. So it's kind of a mixed bag.
Can you, and again, might be betting the rules, right? But you go to parking spaces where it says 5 minutes, loading only, 15 minutes. Can it be a 10-minute or 15-minute for normal cars unless EV and make it a minimum stay in that parking spot? So that way, if someone has to wait, they're only waiting a maximum of 15 minutes in order to charge?
I think we're having energy problems ourselves, apparently. There's an enforcement aspect of this, which is going to really be the real challenge. I mean, it's even designate them EV only is an administrative problem or not. So we were kind of, to Kevin's earlier point, is unless we increase the number of parking spaces in total, we're bumping up against a challenge where we have a designated number of parking spaces. And if we start taking those away and making them designated as only EV, then now we have a problem. We need to either add more parking spaces or allow people to park in those. So, and truly on private property, it's going to be a very difficult thing to enforce. It'll have to come down to the management group and our police would not probably even touch it. So even if they were called in, it'd be like, well, this is a private property parking thing that we're not gonna write a ticket for somebody parking in an EV space.
It seems to me those businesses will figure it out and find the balance that works for them if it's allowed. So I was just curious why it was removed, and that makes sense.
Yep.
With that said, you don't want to try and
No,
change
sir.
this. Okay.
Nope.
Anybody else on this item? Next one, Kevin. Please.
All right, so this next one is on site lighting and building illumination. So this is just a slight tweak and actually adding in an allowance for some site design. So with a lot of building design now, especially with Harmony Corridor, to where we have the requirement that a building lighting get exterminated right at the property boundary. And then the Harmony Corridor, we have that a building must be pretty much up to the 50-foot. In the case of the Timnath Ranch, there's a 50-foot setback, and then that's where their lot is. So it's hard to get a building to have their site illumination cut off to 0 when they're virtually 5 feet away from the property line from that standpoint. So we've had some instances where it's a little bit difficult to get to that requirement. So what we added in is that at the site, the property boundary, the light foot candles must be at 0.1. And then they must be extinguished to 0, 10 feet off the property boundary. It just allows, especially with some of the placement of buildings, the flexibility to have some light spillage, but it's cut off at that 10-foot just because it is a little bit harder to do. And then the other thing that we've added in, which actually will help with some of these developments, is that a private drive may be shared with the site lighting. So basically, if a user wants to provide lighting right up on their property boundary that's adjacent to a private drive, that light fixture can illuminate both the site and the private drive, to where before there would be site lighting specifically for the site, and then could be 10 feet away, there would be lighting just for the private drive. So what we've now done is added in that allowance that lighting can be shared between the site, private drive, and things like that, just to allow for less lighting and have it be a little bit more of a cohesive design.
Commissioners, questions on this item? He said, Tom. Nope. Anybody? Nobody? Okay. Very illuminating, Kevin. Thank you. All right, next item.
So this is a change to waivers. For some of you that have been around for a while, there actually used to be an administrative waiver allowance that got changed to be solely town council waivers. So what we are actually doing is we are asking to add in administrative waivers back into this code for up to 10% of a dimensional standard. And the reasoning for that is, in some instances, as we've already seen with the Harmony Corridor, to where once a specific site can't meet a dimensional standard from Harmony Corridor standards by a foot or a couple of inches, that would have to come before you and town council for a waiver approval, when in reality, a couple inches of a waiver isn't going to change the site design. It's not changing how it looks, how it actually conforms the criteria of it. So this is allowing for a 10% allowance for staff to grant a waiver, and it is truly just to dimensional standards. So like we've seen on Harmony Corridor, if somebody wants to come in with an architectural waiver because they can't meet transparency or something like that, that would still have to come before you all and town council. This is solely for dimensional standard change, such as a setback, a building or a fence height, from 6 feet to 6.5 feet, something like that. That's solely what this is intending to do.
Okay, questions on this one? Lisa.
At what point in time, I mean, when you talk about the 10%, under most instances that, okay, 10% is nothing. But you said this used to be something that was available and then they removed it. Can you give us a little bit of the backstory why it was removed? Why you're bringing it back now?
There was one incident that actually was where council had asked us to remove it years back, and it was with a daycare. So back when we first implemented our daycare criteria, we had a setback between daycares. So if there was a daycare in one location, there couldn't have been another one, and I think it was 1,000 feet to that next location. We had a daycare that was submitted at 980 feet or so. That at that point, that's where staff made the waiver decision that, you know, for a daycare, the 20 feet difference was allowable. So a waiver could go. The new daycare person or the original daycare person that was in first didn't like that there was a competing daycare, went to council to complain that staff gave a waiver to a criteria. Council didn't like that. And they had asked us to remove the allowance for administrative waivers. So over the time, we've brought waivers before you all and town council. And as you've seen, we're getting more and more waiver requests. So staff, we're looking to add in that 10% allowance for dimensional standard, just so on some items, we don't have to come before you all just for a waiver ask that then can be approved on, you know, something, a very minimal dimensional standard.
I guess my concern on that is if you take away our ability to look at some of those things and some of those waivers, then it didn't just build and build and build, and you could get back to the same problem that came from there. We certainly, and we're just a governing body anyway. I mean, obviously we don't have any final say in everything, but I guess I just think as you say, there's more and more waivers being asked. Everybody's saying, you know, I can't do 5 feet. I want to do 4.5. I can't do this, or what about this, or what about this? At some point in time, the pushback needs to have our oversight. So I guess I'm a little concerned about this.
Yeah, and that's why we have it as, we also put in there that it's at the discretion of staff we can either grant it or we can send it before you and town council, depending on the ask and what they have. And that's why I'd mentioned it's solely on dimensional standard items from that standpoint. So we're not getting into the realm of, you know, we're granting waivers on a slew of things. We're granting waivers in the, you know, on things that might be a couple of inches that just because of the way a site design is that they can't meet, you know, some things like that don't truly change the character of the site design. It's more of a technicality that a waiver would have to be asked for that then comes before you all. So that's what staff is, you know, that's what we're intending to do with this. If you all see differently, that's, you know, in your purview as well, but it's more to not elongate a process and put, you know, more applications through longer periods of time, you know, developers through longer periods of time just to get a couple of inches granted on a waiver just because of a unique site design.
And that I understand. I guess I just say it's kind of like once you give an inch, then you take a mile. And, you know, with all the waivers that are coming before us, if they know, okay, we can sneak in under that 10%, and we're going to do 10% here and 10% here and 10% there. At what point do you say, we have these guidelines for a reason? We
Yep.
have these here for a purpose. And so that the outside forces aren't continuing to push. So those are just my concerns.
So staff's position is that we always try and get folks to meet meet code criteria. If we have somebody that comes in to ask for 10% waivers just on a site to make something work, we're going to kick it back to them to say, you need to make site requirements work. And that's where then we have the allowance to say, it's at our discretion to say, if somebody comes in and says, well, I want 10% here, 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 and here, we have that discretion to say, we don't agree with that. You need to go before planning commission and council. So staff's first and foremost is to get people to meet criteria. It's just when we have those unique site designs at times that a waiver might be necessary for one little portion of a site here or there. That's where staff can have that discretion. But if we have somebody trying to bend the rules, as you'd mentioned, we can tell them they have to go before you and town council to make their case. But our first and foremost is to get people to meet criteria.
And
Yeah, I
Timnath
think-
does have an amazing staff and an impeccable staff, but you know, that also puts a lot on you guys that you have to toe the line.
Yeah, I think just to chime in a little bit, I think we understand when somebody's trying to work the system. And we understand if they can meet criteria. We also understand that they can't. And so like Kevin said, I don't believe if somebody wants to abuse the system, we're not going to allow it. I mean, this is all about efficiency and expediency. It's not, they can't work it around us. That's not going to happen.
In addition, there are conditions that they have to meet. So that we didn't change that. So just by giving staff the ability to make the waiver doesn't remove the conditions that they still need to meet. They need to, the alternative better achieves the stated intent. The intent cannot be achieved by the application of the standard. The effect of the other standards will be improved by not applying that standard. Strict application or unique site features make the standard impractical. So we run it through the same filter that you guys run it through. So in a 10% change, as you noted, we're talking, usually it's going to be inches or a couple of feet or here and there. So it's not, if it's over those, then it's coming to you anyways. So it's going to take a lot of effort to string together a bunch of waivers to actually make something measurable to a degree.
I'm assuming too that this is not on the first go around, right? I mean, this is potentially a waiver, last ditch effort to make a project go through. It's not, they're not coming to you right off the bat with a waiver saying, let's get this passed. It's rounds 2, 3, which normally on their part probably come with engineering fees and excessive cost.
Yep.
So it doesn't make any sense for them to, go back and forth a bunch of times.
Yeah,
This is
and
last-
I'll use this as an example from probably one of the more recent ones, the Timnath Beverage site plan. That waiver that they requested for the setback reduction actually came very late in the stage from that standpoint, and it was something that we had gone through reviews with them, getting them to meet code criteria, having them change their site design quite a bit. And then it came to the point of just because of the constrained site, there were two options. Either they needed to do a waiver for the sidewalk width in front of the building up against the parking stalls, or they could reduce that actual technical setback to the property line. And from that point, staff's standpoint was having the parking lot, the sidewalk up against the parking lot in the building was more important because if you have trucks that overhang 3-4 feet, having that additional width to allow pedestrians to walk through was more important than having the setback on the rear end, when at that point there was already a 50-foot landscape setback and buffer from that standpoint. So that came to Jeremy, to your point, towards the end of reviews, because it was trying to find a solution that could work for the site design. So it's not something that, we get people coming in right off the bat of, here's 10 waiver requests that we want. It's, we want to have them meet criteria to begin with. And then if it can't get to that point, it's, well, what criteria can we meet? What can't we meet? And then if, there are some that they still want 10, that's where we have to evaluate it to say, you have to go before planning commission and council.
I've got some thoughts on this, but I want to hear what everybody else has to say.
Just one quick question though is, regardless if it's early or
I don't know. I'm done.
regardless of early or late, the waivers are generally part of the bigger package that's coming in front of us anyway, right?
Yep.
Okay,
Yeah. So, I
it's
mean,
not like there's some that are coming way after the fact that have to come through us.
yeah, typically they're all part of the site plan package
Yeah.
from that standpoint. Yep.
Anybody else on this? Okay, this one caught my eye. And I made some notes here. We did receive a letter on this, and I assume this is the only thing we received. And yeah, it's in your, it's with your agenda here. You want to see it? So, but the note I made was almost identical. While I don't, and I know the danger of a minority opinion on something. But in this case, I don't agree. Well, I don't agree with everything this gentleman said. My note was almost exactly the same. The public has a right to be, he said, the public has a right to be aware of and address proposed waivers. Taking it community director's sole discretion would eliminate planning commission input, town council input, and most important, public input. We are, as Lisa alluded to, we are a recommending body only. And certainly if we make a change to any of these, council can and will have the final say on this. But I do think, I do agree that the public would probably like to know that these things are going through an additional step. I'm not, my advice would be, because and I applaud the staff in dealing with the code, which is, as we've always said, is a fluid living document, and a couple of 3 times a year coming forward with code amendments. So I'm not saying we couldn't necessarily bring this back to us again, but I have a problem with this, minor though it might be, and I don't disagree. We're talking inches or feet in most cases, if not all cases. But I'd like to see if there's any sentiment to recommending with this particular item to council that we did want these to continue to come to Planning Commission and council rather than be sole discretion of the development director. Anybody, is there any sentiment for that? If I'm a sole voice in the wilderness here, so be it. Well, you would, okay, and we may have to pull this out for separate photos. Do I have any other sentiment? You would agree with, okay. All right, well, knowing that when we get to the end of this, let's decide whether we want to pull this item out or indicate that with the sole exception of that one, it looks like we would have 3 votes on that. Anybody else have any other thoughts on this one?
Phil, would it be better if staff, provided a report to the committee here, every time that they had one of these exceptions, told us, hey, we've had 3 exceptions this month? Would that make it easier?
I thought about that, Tom, but I don't know that provides the public with any assurance on anything. And like I said, I think as we see these things come forward, it may be 6 months from now or a year from now, we say, you know what, here's all the exceptions. We're comfortable with that. But at this particular point in time, I thought about that though. That's a good
So
thought,
to
but-
Tom's point, when a site does come forward, that's where we would, in the staff report, also state that, they had asked for an administrative waiver for certain criteria that met the criteria that's listed that they have to meet within the code, and staff had agreed with that waiver. So it's not as if it would be flying blind. It's not as if these waivers are coming outside of a site plan. These waivers are typically associated with a site plan that does come before you all from that standpoint. So they would be known at the time of a site plan that does come forward.
Yeah, I understand that, but that's the closing the barn door after the horse is out as far as the particular nuance upon which I personally have at least a minor problem on this one. And like I said, this is going to go to council the next week.
No, it'll be mid-March.
Okay. And like I said, you can present all these same facts and I'm sure you'll present the fact that because the council's all relatively new, they may not recall how it was at one time, but let's get to the end of this and see if we still have sentiment.
One more clarification from my part. I'm assuming, just me assuming, correct me if I'm wrong, but would this be more to prevent holdups in projects? Is that the cause of wanting this to happen? Because we're running into roadblocks and things are taking longer than they normally should, or what's the
It
main
just
reason behind it?
elongates a process typically to add in the waiver process because they do have to go through you all and then town council. And at that point, as it's been mentioned, taking a waiver forward, that could elongate a process by almost a month. Depending on, the timing of meetings for a couple of inches here or there. That's generally the genesis for, this.
Does that come with additional labor hours from the town, a cost associated with it, or is it just purely time in a project getting approved or not approved?
It's additional staff time bringing forward to, an item waiver request to additional meeting. It's more time from that standpoint, additional time from a developer side of things and money from that.
So
it's
cost associated on both ends.
There's
go
time
up.
and costs associated on both sides.
Okay.
And there is also, sorry, Phil.
Yeah, go ahead.
There's also some uncertainty too from the developer's perspective because they're going to have to, if they're bringing a waiver forward, their plan is dependent upon that waiver hypothetically getting approved. So if they have to go to planning commission, you guys say we're good with it, and then it's got to go to council, and the council then, let's say the council says they're not good with it. Well, now they've removed, and this, we're talking again about inches. We're not talking about significant waivers. Now it's going to go all the way back, redesign, reprocess, staff review, planning commission review. And if they've now met those standards, they don't have to go to council, but if they're still asking for yet another waiver, then they're going for, so there's uncertainty is what I'm getting at with that predicament that they're potentially in.
But the waiver is part of the overall proposal. So I'm having trouble seeing how it would hold anything up or disadvantage. And like I said, I'm not basing this, I'm not going to sit here and say, yeah, we would approve every waiver because we haven't always done that. But I just think it's a matter of public perception. And like I said, council has the final say. Council, they're elected officials, so they obviously know far better than we do about public perception of something. So if council, when you present this to them in March, in their infinite wisdom, if they see they don't have a problem with this, we've been overruled before and we'll be overruled again. So I wouldn't have a problem with that. But we'll see what we get here if we advance this one. Let's move on to the next item.
Next item is just actually more of a cleanup. We had a minor annexation application fee of 500 inadvertently from the last code. Didn't meet our fine fee schedule from the municipal code. So it's just removing that to clear up any ambiguity from that standpoint.
Questions on that?
I just have a quick one, which I believe is a typo. On the proposed change at the bottom, you say the annexation petition submission shall include, and then it's struck. So that last sentence where it says the annexation petition submission shall include should either be removed or the application fee should be.
Yeah, we'll look at that.
That's all.
Other comments on this one? Okay. I suppose the best way to advance the item 6C is if we have in the course of a motion, and if you have a sentiment.
So,
I thought that was, you said the last one. Okay, go ahead.
no.
Okay, very good. Continue.
So this is one of the ones that I'd mentioned that there was some differencing in language on parks and open space and the requirement. So on 5762, so previously, on Parket Parks, it was determined that it was any residential dwelling or development of more than 50 dwelling units shall provide a pocket park. What we actually did is we changed that to be more than 6, and 6 is the number because that's what our minor subdivision allowance is for. So anything over 6 lots has to go into the major subdivision. So we had felt that if, somebody's doing a 45 lot development, they should be providing a pocket park, to where our current code wasn't requiring that. And then we kind of gave in a little bit more, definition to what the pocket park shall include. Instead of just saying playground equipment, we added in active play areas, shade areas. And then one thing that we did include with this is state that pocket park should generally be located at least a quarter mile away from a neighborhood park if there is one, and then distributed evenly throughout the development to provide service to residents that are further away than a quarter of a mile from a neighborhood park. So on the larger developments that are 600-700 dwelling units, basically it's to ensure that people on the outer rims of the development are still being having adequate service for park areas instead of having some of them located clumped together on one area of the property or versus not. So we've kind of added in that language for when there is the neighborhood park requirement. The other thing that we changed was the neighborhood park requirement. So we actually had, it actually kind of goes hand in hand. This section said that every residential development over 200 dwelling units shall provide for a park. But in the next section that we'll kind of talk about, it says there needs to be 6 acres of neighborhood parks for every 300 dwelling units. So it was a little bit conflicting at that point of saying, well, anything over 200 needs to have a park, but you need to have 6 acres for every 300 dwelling units. So there was just a little bit, of conflicting languages that's in there. But on the neighborhood park requirement, that's where we added in more language that for one that development that is providing one, that the neighborhood park be centrally located and generally reach, every residence within a quarter of a mile. That's the intent, to make sure that, kind of with the pocket park, the main larger park is centrally located, and then folks that are maybe on that outer rim still have park access. So we have the 300 dwelling units, and then what we actually add in is 6 acres instead of 5. That was another one of the conflicting languages that we had there to match the other section. But then we added in a requirement that each additional 100 dwelling units over the 300 must provide an additional acre of park ground. So if it's a neighborhood of 400 dwelling units, they need to provide at least 7 acres of a neighborhood park. From that standpoint. And then what we added in as well is we took out just the kind of the ambiguous language that said including an active play area and irrigated landscaping. We defined that more to say that at least 70% of the parkland must consist of active play areas and irrigated landscaping, including at least 2 of a couple of different options to provide, such as play fields, athletic courts, turf or shade areas, some things like that. And then with this, then the remaining 30% of a neighborhood park can be made up of native grass, native landscaping, some detention pond, things like that. But the primary focus of a neighborhood park should be the active areas within this. And then kind of to one of Jeremy's earlier points, we are allowing within this to have artificial turf, an allowance within that, reviewed by staff on a case-by-case basis, which would then still have to come before you. From that standpoint, the reasoning for that is with the state of water conservation. It might be some developers might want to look at the fact of having a soccer field be artificial turf, just for maintenance and water irrigation standpoint. So we can now look at having some artificial turf allowance within neighborhood parks, as long as they are appropriately utilized from that standpoint. And then the last thing with neighborhood parks, which really wasn't talked about in the code that we've now added in, is that at sketch plan, if you kind of all remember, sketch plans typically locate, neighborhood parks, kind of where they would be, and the level of service of parks that would be needed for development. But there was really never a trigger for when a neighborhood park had to be installed and developed. So what has happened at times is on the larger developments, they come in with 100 lots of a final plat, 100 lots of a final plat, 100 lots of a final plat. And then their neighborhood park is kind of one of the last things that come in, just because that plat doesn't have 300 lots. So what we've done now is added in language that says once they get to the 300th platted lot, that neighborhood park as depicted on their sketch plan has to be installed. So at that point, if they come in with 100, 100, 150, that third one, since it would be over 300, that then triggers their requirement to add in the neighborhood park. So that way, at least that level of service and that amenity is installed earlier in the process than potentially later.
Questions on this item?
One really quick question. Now, did you also go in to discuss 5.7.6.4? Are you gonna, is that one, I mean, that.
They do go hand in hand. I can discuss at the same time.
Just a real quick clarification
Yep.
on the 5.7.6.4 on the added, you said for subdivisions with less than 300 dwelling units, pocket parks have at least for every 50 dwelling units. But
Or portion thereof.
Okay, so
Yep.
even those ones that maybe only have 10,
Yep.
they're gonna have to.
They
have it.
still have to have some. So yeah, that's where the portion thereof comes in. So on a subdivision of 40 lots, they have to have 0.4 acres of a pocket park from that standpoint. So adding in that portion thereof, at least still requires them to have some type of pocket park requirement. It's just once you get to the 50 dwelling units, that's generally when the level of service is about a half acre for those 50 dwelling units. So that's where the portion thereof, comes into play.
Okay, I just wanted that clarification. Thank you.
She kind of jumped ahead there. Do you
Yep.
need to go back to the other related?
We can talk about that next
Okay.
one. So yeah, on the 5764, they kind of go hand in hand to where we changed on B, for subdivisions over 300 dwelling units, they, have to have the pocket parks of that size for every 100 dwelling units within there. And then what we actually added in was pocket parks can be combined. So if their requirement is 4 pocket parks, they could combine 2 of them to become one larger park but no more than 1 acre. So they couldn't combine 3 parks to be an acre and a half. They can only do basically a combination of 2 to get to a 1 acre maximum. And then, we added in that, for the pocket park requirement for any subdivision less than 300 dwelling units, provide that portion thereof, depending on the size. And then that last one on D, that's where we kind of changed that language to match up with the previous one to make sure there was 6 acres for every 300 dwelling units. And then the additional acre per 100 over 300 with the quarter mile spacing. And then what we actually added in with that as well is if you get to a subdivision over 600 total units, they can divide the required acreage of the neighborhood park evenly. Let's take, for instance, Timnath Landings. They could basically say, well, we want to do 3 neighborhood parks just because they're almost on a square mile from that standpoint. So instead of having one centrally located one, they could take their required acreage and put one in the north, one in the south, however they want to see fit, just to provide that, additional level of service for their residents, giving them that option. But that is only on subdivisions that are over 600 units.
Questions on this one? You all thought that one through very well, I must say. Really?
The only thing I have, just a quick comment, that the 30% natural area.
Yep.
And I think this is more in the review process, not the land use codes, but it's just natural areas to me just tend to very few subdivisions, I think, do it well, but most don't. They just tend to be a cheap, unkept maintenance, that's unusable and can be dangerous. So
Yeah, so one of the, actually, one of the examples that we kind of looked at for doing this requirement is actually Trailside, the subdivision right next to us. In their neighborhood park, they actually do a very good job of combining turf areas with the native areas and having both of them utilized quite well. Get them established, and the native areas are more of an accent area to the neighborhood park itself. So that was generally the genesis, behind it. We do. We'll have to double check, but one of the things that we have in our code, and I think it's already in our code, where we were. Oh, it's the last one, very last one. Thank you. Is that what we're actually doing is we're removing the section on irrigation that says temporary irrigation shall be used to establish native, to where native, if it's used, has to have a dedicated irrigation for it. So it can at least be watered twice a week or whatever it is to make sure that it establishes and maintains.
okay.
We have another one. I didn't print it out, so I couldn't remember which. Is that,
Oh, no, we're still going.
yeah, that's what, okay, good.
So the next one is just kind of clarifying on Harmony Corridor standards. So right now, the parking lot requirement just said parking lots shall not extend more than 130 feet along the Harmony Road frontage. We included to also say drive aisles. So that was one of the waiver requests that Come and Go actually asked for, because as staff, we interpreted it saying it was part of their parking lot. They needed to meet that requirement. So just from that, we actually included the drive aisles to make sure that any other use that would come forward, a bank or something else that might have their drive aisle up against Harmony Road, that it's clear that, the drive aisle is included in that requirement. The other thing that we changed was, it said one electric vehicle charging spaces within each development, but we just removed the one where it said one and said that they need to provide the appropriate number per the 5818, which was the whole EV station section we talked about previously. Just so there is no confusion on what each development has to provide. It's that everyone across the board is providing the same requirement.
Questions on this one? No? Anybody? No? Okay.
All right, the next one is also in Harmony Corridor standards. This is just a slight modification to the planting bed size. We have, there's a lot of instances where if a parking lot is up against a drive aisle or up against a building, that a planting bed of 5 feet might not be achievable. So reducing that, having a reduction allowed on a case by case basis. From that standpoint, it's merely just depending on how the site lays out, that not all planting beds might not achieve a 5 foot width, at least minimum all the way through. So there's just adding in that flexibility that within their site design that they can reduce it slightly if they need.
Any questions on this one?
All right, next one is on dimensional standards. So specifically for window wells, the previous code, as it's stated that window wells and air conditioning units, but more or less window wells must not be closer than 2 feet to the property line on lots with 7 feet side yard, and then no closer to 1 foot on property lines on 5 foot side yard setbacks, and then window wells that are part of the foundation need to meet the setback requirements. So what we've actually done is we've changed that to be more specific, just because a window well that is that could technically be part of the foundation, but not part of the foundation, if it's made out of timber, but they put rebar in the foundation to help support the timber, isn't necessarily part of the foundation itself. So it's not that integral part to it. So what we've actually done is we've changed it to say window wells and then areas open to basement windows. For those window wells, they can only encroach 3 feet into the setback requirement, and it's measured to the outside of the construction material. So it's still having an allowance for, window wells to encroach into the setback, but restricting them that they can only go 3 feet into the setback, and not, as much as we had it previously.
Questions on this item? I think he's wearing us down there.
I know.
don't you?
Well, last one, and this was one that I had already mentioned with that with the park requirement. It's the removing that allowance for temporary irrigation to establish native grasses for 2 seasons or fully establishment. That's being removed. So now that any type of native has to have at least dedicated irrigation for watering to continue to be established and maintained.
Questions on this one? No? Okay. We made it.
I'm kidding. There's 20 more.
No, I remember now. It ends with the window wells and the native grasses. So I think what's most appropriate is if there's still going to be sentiment on item 2.915, the waiver issue, for the motion to be made by somebody who shares that sentiment, the motion would be to approve all of the staff's recommended changes to the land use code with the exception of that item, and have it noted to staff, to a council. And then if council chooses to change that, they certainly may. Would that seem a reasonable way to do this? Incorporate that in the motion rather than pulling it out and voting on it separately. Staff, would that be acceptable?
My question is, if I'm in agreement with that and don't see a need to oppose it, right? It's just, would that portion of it go to vote, or would the overall, how does that work?
I believe it would work if we don't get a second, and if we get we don't get a second, or we get a second and we
All in favor?
and
if I say, yeah.
and we don't get 3 votes to it. We don't get the votes to advance the overall package with that waiver, then we go back and the motion doesn't carry. Now we have to change the motion.
Correct.
Okay. All right. So
One alternative to that would be, I guess it could be in the motion to either remove that completely or apply categories, that may be less impactful, that could have that way, that.
not sure what you're saying. If you're talking about categories, now we're going to try and parse the details of what we want to.
Well, I guess we'd be giving them a recommendation to either strike it or apply category, for them to apply categories to this.
Well, I think that's in their discretion. They can say, if they understand this, they may simply say, we don't care. We agree with the staff.
Okay.
So I'm okay pulling it out. But in the interest of time, it's really 6 of one and a half a dozen the other. If you want to pull it out, or you want to make the motion, which
Go ahead and do that.
okay, do I have a motion on business item 6C land use code amendment to include regarding item 2.9.15, that being the exception to which on which we would not vote to approve.
I make a motion that we approve all of the land use codes presented to us except for the waivers, which includes 2.9.15.1 and we exclude that from being approved. So we approve all but that.
Okay, do I have a second on that? As I believe that captured it. Do I have a second on that?
Second?
Okay, now, this is not as major item as some, but typically, as I tried to explain with another item, was at the last meeting, if somebody if you want to vote counter to the sentiment, then if you can state your reason, your reason being you don't see any reason to pull that out, is that those of you who've been here a while and seen us use this protocol, that would be acceptable. So let's have a roll call vote, if we would, on this, Natalie. And then if somebody wants to vote counter to other votes, state your reason so that staff can then present that to council. Does that sound acceptable, staff? Okay, Natalie. I vote yes to the motion as presented.
Vice Chairperson Marty Jost,
Yes.
Commissioner Lisa Bard,
Yes?
Commissioner Tom Wood.
No, the reason is I
Hey,
don't think.
Tom,
we need to pull it out.
make sure your mic's on, sorry.
I vote no with my rationale saying I don't think we need to pull it out.
Very good.
Commissioner Jeremy Holt.
I would vote no as well with the condition of, I don't think we need to pull it out either. I think I'm good with approving them all.
Okay, thank you. All right. Assuming we did that procedurally okay, and I think we did, then the motion carries on a 3-2 vote. Thank you, and thanks staff for, again, I think this points to the fact that there's a heck of a lot of work that went into all that. I'm very impressed with it. The fact that the code is a living document.
And the summaries really helped for me, giving context.
Okay, good job. All right, we'll move on to reports. Do we have a meeting? We do have a meeting. I believe I saw that on the 7th. Right now, do we know? Yes, okay. Does anybody know they're not going to be here March 7th? Is that the one? Mike, there was. Okay, the meeting after that. Okay, anybody else? Right at this point, I'm not holding you to it.
I'll be here on the 7th, but I'm out of town on the 21st.
Okay, we got to make note that you do too. Okay, we've already got.
Yeah, it's spring break.
Okay. All right. Well, right now, we've got 3 people that won't be here on the 21st if we have a meeting. So you probably don't know if we're having a meeting then anyway, at this point. Okay.
If necessary, I could call in, but I'll be out of the country.
Okay. Commissioners, anything else?
Go with the kids.
Don, anything? Gonna snow. I have one question. The senior living development to the due east of here, is that all right to ask? Just curious. It hasn't gotten off the ground, literally or figure.
Who knows?
Okay.
Your guess is as good as ours.
Okay, that's all right. That'll work. All right. Staff, anything, planners, anything else? Development director? Anything? Okay. With that, do I have a motion to adjourn?
So move.
I have a second? All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? We're adjourned.